3 months had passed since Emma's arrival at the Sullivan farm, and the transformation was remarkable. The house that had once echoed with the chaos of overwhelmed children now hummed with comfortable routine and genuine laughter. Emma had found her rhythm with the family, and they had found theirs with her. The morning sun streamed through clean windows as Emma prepared breakfast, humming softly while she worked. Lucy sat at the kitchen table, carefully copying letters on her slate, while simultaneously keeping an eye on Mary, who was attempting to feed herself porridge with mixed results. Samuel was outside with his father, proudly helping with the morning chores despite being only 4 years old. "Miss Emma," Lucy said, holding up her slate. "How does this look?" Emma examined the careful rows of letters with appropriate seriousness. "Those are beautiful, Lucy. Your handwriting is getting so neat. I think you're ready to start writing full words soon." Lucy's face lit up with pride. It was an expression Emma had been seeing more often lately, as the little girl gradually allowed herself to be 6 years old instead of carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. The transformation in Samuel had been even more dramatic. The withdrawn, tantrum-prone boy had blossomed into a cheerful chatterbox who threw himself into every activity with enthusiasm. His latest obsession was helping Emma in the garden, where he had appointed himself chief bug inspector and weed puller. But it was Mary's progress that brought Emma the most joy. The toddler had begun calling her Mama Emma, a compromise that honored her real mother's memory while acknowledging Emma's place in her daily life. She no longer cried for her mama at bedtime, instead reaching for Emma when she needed comfort. James appeared in the kitchen doorway, Samuel perched on his shoulders and giggling with delight. "Ladies, we've come to report that all the animals are fed and happy," he announced in a formal tone that made Samuel collapse into fresh giggles. "And the chickens laid extra eggs today," Samuel added importantly. "I counted 7. Emma felt her heart warm at the sight. The exhausted, grieving man she had met 3 months ago had gradually given way to someone lighter, more relaxed. He smiled more often now, and the deep lines of worry around his eyes had softened. The change wasn't just due to having help with the household, Emma realized. It was also because his children were happy again, and their happiness had allowed him to find his own. 7 eggs calls for a celebration breakfast, Emma declared. "Samuel, would you like to help me make pancakes?" As they fell into their morning routine, Emma reflected on how naturally they had all adapted to their new arrangement. She had worried about overstepping boundaries, about the children becoming too attached to her, about James feeling like she was trying to replace their mother. But, instead of conflict, they had found harmony. James had been true to his word about treating her with respect. He consulted her opinions about the children, valued her suggestions for improving the household, and never made her feel like a servant. More importantly, he had been patient as she learned to navigate her role in their lives. The first few weeks had been challenging. Samuel had tested her boundaries repeatedly. Lucy had been politely distant, and Mary had cried for her real mama at bedtime. Emma had questioned her decision more than once, wondering if she was truly helping or just complicating their grief. But, gradually, small moments had built trust between them. When Samuel had fallen and scraped his knee, he had run to Emma for comfort without thinking. When Lucy had struggled with a difficult passage in her primer, she had sought Emma's help naturally. When Mary had woken from a nightmare, she had reached for Emma's hand in the darkness. Each of these moments had been a gift, proof that the children were accepting her not as a replacement for their mother, but as someone new and valuable in their lives. "Miss Emma," Lucy said suddenly, interrupting her thoughts. "Mrs. Jenkins is coming up the path." Emma looked out the window to see Martha's familiar wagon approaching. She visited regularly, always with some excuse about checking on James or bringing news from town. But Emma suspected she simply wanted to make sure the arrangement was working out well for everyone. "Perfect timing," Emma said, adding extra pancakes to the griddle. "We'll have plenty to share." Martha bustled into the kitchen with her usual energy, accepting a cup of coffee and settling into what had become her regular chair. "My goodness, something smells wonderful in here. And look at how clean everything is. Emma, you've worked miracles in this household." "The children are very well behaved," Emma protested, but she felt a glow of pride at the praise. They just needed some consistency and attention. "Papa says Miss Emma makes the best pancakes in Colorado." Samuel announced, climbing onto Martha's lap with the confidence of a child who knew he was welcome everywhere. Martha's eyes twinkled with amusement. Does he now? And what else does your papa say about Miss Emma? Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past month, she had become increasingly aware of James as more than just her employer. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how gentle his hands were when he braided Lucy's hair, how he always made sure she had eaten enough at meals. But she had been careful to keep these observations to herself. He says she's the best helper we ever had, Lucy answered seriously. And that Mama would like her very much. James chose that moment to enter the kitchen, having settled Samuel's earlier excitement with promises of more outdoor adventures after breakfast. He caught the tail end of the conversation and looked questioningly between Martha and Emma. We were just discussing how well Emma has settled in here, Martha explained innocently. The children seem quite attached to her. She's become an important part of our family, James agreed, his tone carefully neutral. But Emma caught him looking at her. James looked between Martha and Emma, clearly trying to piece together the situation. His calloused hands rested gently on Samuel's shoulders as the boy continued to chatter about the kitchen adventure. Emma noticed how naturally protective his posture was, how his children gravitated toward him despite his weariness. Mrs. Jenkins, I'm not sure what you mean, James said carefully. His voice was deep and quiet, the kind that never needed to be raised to command attention. Martha settled herself in one of the kitchen chairs without invitation, a privilege clearly earned through long friendship. James Sullivan, you're about to collapse from exhaustion. Your children need more care than you can provide while running this farm. And this young woman needs honest work and a safe place to stay. It seems to me that God has a sense of humor, bringing solutions and problems together at just the right moment. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. She gently set Mary down and stepped back, suddenly, feeling like an intruder in this family's private space. Perhaps I should wait outside while you discuss this, she said quietly. No, Lucy spoke up suddenly, surprising everyone. She moved closer to Emma, her small hand reaching out to touch Emma's skirt. I like how you helped us clean up. You didn't get angry about the mess. Samuel nodded vigorously. And you said wanting cookies was understandable, he added, clearly proud of remembering the big word. James's expression softened as he looked at his children's reaction to Emma. Mrs. Jenkins, could you help me understand the situation better? I don't want to make assumptions. Martha gave Emma an encouraging nod. Go ahead, dear. James is a good man. You can speak plainly with him. Emma took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I was married to Thomas Whitmore for 3 months. When it became clear that I couldn't give him children, he ended our arrangement. I have nowhere to go and very little money. Mrs. Jenkins suggested you might need help with your household and children. She watched James's face carefully as she spoke, looking for signs of judgment or disgust. Instead, his jaw tightened with what looked like anger, though she sensed it wasn't directed at her. Thomas Whitmore is a fool, James said bluntly, then caught himself. Forgive me, that's not my place to say. But any man who would judge a woman's worth by such means. He shook his head, clearly struggling to keep his opinion to himself. Papa, Lucy tugged at his sleeve. Does this mean Miss Emma might stay and help us? James knelt down to his daughter's eye level. We need to talk about this as a family, Lucy. It's not just my decision to make. He turned to include Samuel and Mary in his gaze. What do you think? Should we ask Miss Emma if she'd like to stay for supper, and we can all get to know each other better? Emma was touched by his approach. Even with children so young, he treated their opinions as important. It spoke well of his character and his commitment to being a good father. Samuel jumped up and down with excitement. Yes, yes, she makes cleaning fun. Mary toddled over to Emma and raised her arms again, clearly having decided that Emma was trustworthy. Emma couldn't help but smile as she picked up the little girl. I think that would be very nice, Lucy said with her serious dignity. Miss Emma seems kind. James stood and faced Emma directly. Miss Carson, would you be willing to stay for supper? We could discuss the arrangement Mrs. Jenkins suggested, and you could see if this situation might suit you. I would like that very much, Emma replied. But, please, let me help prepare the meal. I'd like to be useful. As Martha took her leave with promises to check on them soon, Emma found herself alone with the Sullivan family. The kitchen felt different now, warmer somehow, less chaotic. James showed her where things were kept while the children played nearby, their earlier distress forgotten. "I should warn you," James said as he hauled water from the well. "Life here is simple. We don't have many luxuries, and the work can be demanding. The children are good, but they're still grieving their mother, and that comes out in different ways." Emma nodded as she began peeling potatoes she'd found in the root cellar. "I understand grief, Mr. Sullivan, and I'm not afraid of hard work." As if to test her words, Samuel chose that moment to attempt climbing onto the kitchen table. Emma calmly intercepted him, lifting him down with a gentle but firm, "Tables are for dishes, not for climbing, sweetheart." "But I can see everything better from up there," Samuel protested. "You can see me just fine from down here," Emma said, crouching to his level. "And if you want to help me cook, you need to be where I can reach you easily." Samuel considered this logic and decided it was acceptable. Soon he was standing on a sturdy chair beside Emma, carefully dropping potato pieces into the pot under her guidance. James watched this interaction from the doorway, something unreadable in his expression. When Emma caught his eye, he quickly looked away and busied himself with other chores. Supper was a simple affair: potato soup with bread and butter and stewed apples from the family's own trees. But it felt abundant to Emma, who had been eating very little over the past few days. More than the food, though, she was nourished by the warmth of family conversation. Lucy told her about the lessons she was learning from a primer. Samuel demonstrated his ability to count to 20, and Mary babbled happily in her high chair, occasionally offering Emma bites of her bread. James was quieter, but Emma noticed how he listened carefully to each child, how he gently corrected Samuel's table manners without shaming him, how he cut Mary's food into perfectly sized pieces. This was a man who had learned to be both father and mother to his children, and it showed in every small gesture. After supper, as Emma helped clear the table, James made his proposal. "Miss Carson, I can offer you room and board plus $2 a week in wages. The work would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and watching the children while I'm working the farm. I can't promise it would be easy, but I can promise it would be honest work with people who would treat you with respect." $2 a week wasn't much, but it was more than Emma had now. More importantly, it was the promise of belonging somewhere, of being needed and valued. "There's something you should know," she said quietly, glancing at the children who were playing with wooden blocks near the fireplace. "About why my marriage failed, if that matters to you." James's expression grew serious. "Miss Carson, I married for love, and I lost my wife in spite of all the love in the world. I've learned that there are more important things than what society expects from a marriage. If you're willing to care for my children and help keep our household running, your personal circumstances are none of my business." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. After months of feeling like a failure as a woman, here was a man who judged her only on what she could offer, not on what she couldn't provide. "I accept your offer, Mr. Sullivan." "Papa," Lucy appeared at his elbow. "Where will Miss Emma sleep?" James looked suddenly embarrassed. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. We don't really have a proper guest room." "There's the small room off the kitchen," Emma suggested. "I saw it earlier. If it's not being used for something else, that would be perfect for me. Close enough to hear the children if they need anything at night, but out of your way." "That was Rebecca's sewing room," James said softly. "I haven't touched it since." He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. "But she would want it to be useful again. Let me clean it out for you." "We could do it together," Emma offered, "if that wouldn't be too difficult for you." Over the next hour, as the children played and then gradually grew sleepy, Emma and James worked side by side to transform the small sewing room into a bedroom. They moved Rebecca's sewing machine and fabric to a corner of the main bedroom, dusted and swept, and brought in a simple bed frame from the barn. James worked mostly in silence, but Emma could see the memories playing across his face as he handled his wife's belongings. When he picked up a half-finished baby quilt, his hands trembled slightly. "She was making this when she found out she was expecting Mary," he said quietly. "She never got to finish it." Emma touched the soft fabric gently. "It's beautiful work. Would you like me to complete it? I'm fairly good with a needle." James looked at her with surprise. "You would do that?" I think she would want it finished, don't you? For Mary to have something her mother made for her. For a moment, James's composure cracked, and Emma saw the depth of grief he carried. Then, he nodded, carefully folding the quilt and placing it in her hands. By the time they finished preparing the room, the children were yawning widely. Emma watched as James went through the nighttime routine, helping Samuel wash his face, braiding Lucy's hair for sleep, rocking Mary until her eyes grew heavy. "Papa," Lucy said drowsily as he tucked her into the bed she shared with Mary. "Is Miss Emma going to be our new mama?" Emma felt her breath catch, unsure how James would handle such a direct question. "Miss Emma is going to be our friend and helper," James said gently. "She's going to take care of you and help around the house. That doesn't make her your mama, but it does make her very special to our family." Lucy seemed to consider this. "I think Mama would like her," she said finally. "I think she would too, sweetheart." As the house settled into quiet, Emma found herself alone with James in the kitchen. The awkwardness of their situation suddenly seemed overwhelming. She was essentially a stranger living in his house, caring for his children, sleeping just steps from his own bedroom. "Miss Carson," James began, then stopped and started over. "Emma, I want you to know that you're safe here. I would never take advantage of your situation or expect anything from you beyond what we've agreed upon." Emma felt relief flood through her. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Sullivan. I confess I was worried about the propriety of the arrangement." "James," he corrected, "if you're going to be living here, we should use first names. And as for propriety, Mrs. Jenkins will make sure the whole county knows exactly what our arrangement is. You don't need to worry about your reputation." As Emma settled into her small room that night, she reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. This morning she had been homeless and hopeless. Tonight she had a roof over her head, meaningful work ahead of her, and 3 children who had already begun to trust her. It wasn't the life she had planned, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Thomas Whitmore had wanted her to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. James Sullivan seemed content to let her simply be herself. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving quietly in his own room, the soft creak of floorboards as he prepared for bed. She wondered if he was thinking about the strange woman now sleeping in his wife's sewing room, if he had any doubts about the decision they'd made. But then she heard a different sound, Samuel calling out from a bad dream. Emma started to rise, thinking she should check on him, but she heard James's footsteps first. Through the wall came the low murmur of a father's voice, soothing and patient, as he comforted his son back to sleep. Emma smiled in the darkness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was certain of one thing. James Sullivan was a good man, and his children were lucky to have him. Perhaps, if she worked hard and proved herself worthy, they might come to feel lucky to have her too. The thought of belonging to this small, wounded family filled her with something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that might be better than anything she had dared to dream. Outside her window, the Colorado night was vast and filled with stars. Somewhere out there, Thomas Whitmore was probably sleeping peacefully, convinced he had made the right decision in casting her aside. He would never know that his cruelty had led her to something far better than the cold, calculating marriage he had offered. Emma closed her eyes and let herself imagine the days ahead. Teaching Lucy to read more difficult words, helping Samuel channel his energy into useful tasks, watching Mary grow and learn to express herself better, creating a warm, welcoming home where laughter could gradually replace grief. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since her world had collapsed, Emma felt equal to the challenge ahead. She had found her place, and she was going to make the most of it. Emma sat on the worn wooden bench at the train station, clutching her single carpet bag with trembling hands. The letter in her coat pocket felt heavier than lead. Each word burned into her memory like a brand. "We regret to inform you that due to your inability to bear children, we must terminate our arrangement." Those words had shattered her world just 3 days ago. At 26, Emma had already lived through more heartbreak than most women twice her age. Born in a small Pennsylvania mining town, she had watched her father die in a cave-in when she was just 15. Her mother followed 2 years later, succumbing to tuberculosis and a broken heart. With no family left and few options for unmarried women, Emma had turned to the only respectable choice available, becoming a mail-order bride. The arrangement with Thomas Whitmore had seemed like a godsend. He was a successful rancher in Colorado Territory who needed a wife to help manage his household. Their correspondence had been cordial, if not romantic. He seemed kind enough in his letters, describing his modest ranch and his hope for a peaceful life with a good woman by his side. Emma had sold her few remaining possessions, used the money for train fare, and traveled over 800 miles to meet her intended husband. But 3 months into their marriage, when no signs of pregnancy appeared, Thomas had grown cold and distant. He began consulting with the town doctor, subjecting Emma to humiliating examinations and treatments. When the doctor finally declared that Emma was likely barren, Thomas had wasted no time in discarding her like a broken tool. Now Emma faced an impossible situation. She had no money for return passage to Pennsylvania, assuming she even had anything to return to. The few coins in her purse would barely buy her meals for a week. She had spent her last night as Thomas's wife sleeping in the barn, as he had made it clear she was no longer welcome in his house. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform as Emma watched other passengers hurry past. Families with children, businessmen with purpose, everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except her. She had heard stories of women in her situation. Some turned to unsavory work just to survive. Others simply disappeared into the wilderness, never to be seen again. A gentle tapping sound caught her attention. An elderly woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached, tapping her walking stick softly against the wooden planks. She wore a simple but well-made dress, and her weathered hands spoke of a life of honest work. "Excuse me, dear," the woman said, settling onto the bench beside Emma with a soft grunt. "I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for quite some time. I'm Martha Jenkins, and I live just outside of town. Are you waiting for someone?" Emma felt tears threatening to spill over. The woman's kindness was almost too much to bear after the cruelty she had endured. "No, ma'am. I'm not waiting for anyone. I don't really know where to go." Martha studied Emma's face with the shrewd eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize trouble when she saw it. "Would I be right in guessing you're the young woman who was staying with Thomas Whitmore?" Emma nodded, unable to trust her voice. "I thought so. Word travels fast in a town this size, especially when it involves someone like Thomas." Martha's tone carried a hint of disapproval. That man has always been more concerned with appearances than character. His first wife, God rest her soul, suffered greatly under his roof. This was news to Emma. Thomas had mentioned a previous wife only briefly, saying she had died of fever. "I didn't know he had been married before." "Oh yes, poor Sarah. Lovely girl, much like yourself." Thomas made her life miserable because she couldn't give him the large family he felt he deserved. She died birthing their only child, a daughter who lived just 3 days. Martha shook her head sadly. Some men never learn that a woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to bear children. Emma felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the unknown woman who had suffered before her, and relief that she wasn't alone in her experience of Thomas's cruelty. "Tell me, dear, do you have anywhere to go? Any family or friends who might take you in?" Emma shook her head. "Everyone I knew is gone. I spent what little money I had just getting here." Martha was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I have a proposition for you, if you're willing to hear it. My neighbor, James Sullivan, is in need of help with his children. He's a good man, a widower who lost his wife in childbirth 2 years ago. He's struggling to manage his farm and care for 3 little ones on his own." Emma's heart skipped. The idea of being around children after being rejected for her inability to have them felt like salt in a wound. Martha seemed to sense her hesitation. "Now, before you say anything, let me tell you about James. He's nothing like Thomas Whitmore. He's gentle, hardworking, and he loves those children more than life itself. He's not looking for a wife. He's too focused on his grief and his responsibilities for that. But he desperately needs help, and I think you might be exactly what his family needs." "What kind of help?" Emma asked cautiously. "Housekeeping, cooking, minding the children while he works the farm. He can offer room and board, plus a small wage. Nothing fancy, but it would give you a roof over your head and honest work." Martha placed a gentle hand on Emma's arm. I know it might seem daunting to be around children when you're hurting, but sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places. Emma considered the offer. She had few alternatives, and the prospect of honest work appealed to her. After months of feeling like a failure as a woman, perhaps caring for children who weren't expected to be her own would provide some peace. What are the children like? She asked. Martha's face lit up with genuine affection. Oh, they're wonderful, though they've been through so much. There's Lucy, who's 6 years old and tries to mother everyone. She's got her father's dark hair and her mother's gentle spirit. Then there's Samuel, who just turned 4. He's all energy and curiosity, always getting into mischief, but with such a sweet heart. And little Mary is barely 2, just learning to talk and walk properly. She looks exactly like her mother did at that age. Emma felt something stir in her chest, not quite hope, but perhaps the possibility of purpose. These children needed care, and she needed a place in the world. It wouldn't be the family she had dreamed of, but it could be meaningful work. Would he really hire someone like me? Someone who was cast off. James Sullivan judges people by their actions, not their circumstances. He knows hardship himself. He came west with nothing but determination and built his farm from scratch. His wife Rebecca was the kindest soul you ever met, and she would have been the first to open her door to someone in need. Martha stood slowly, leaning heavily on her walking stick. If you're willing, I'll take you to meet him today. You can decide for yourself if it feels right. Emma looked around the empty train station one more time. She could continue sitting here until her money ran out and desperation forced her into darker choices, or she could take a chance on a new beginning. It wouldn't be the life she had planned, but perhaps it could be something better than what she was leaving behind. Yes, she said, standing and gathering her carpet bag. I would like to meet him. Martha smiled warmly. Good girl. My wagon is just outside. It's a bit of a ride to the Sullivan place, but it'll give us time to talk more about what you might expect. As they walked toward the station door, Emma felt the first glimmer of something she hadn't experienced in months, possibility. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since receiving that terrible letter, she felt like she might have a future worth living. The Colorado sun felt warmer on her face as they stepped outside, and Emma allowed herself to believe that perhaps Martha was right. Maybe healing could come from the most unexpected places. Maybe this wasn't an ending after all, but a beginning she never could have imagined. Martha's wagon was simple but well-maintained, hitched to a gentle mare who nickered softly as they approached. As Martha helped Emma settle her bag in the back, she continued talking about the Sullivan family. James lost Rebecca during a difficult winter. The nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away, and by the time help could reach them, it was too late. He blamed himself terribly, though there was nothing anyone could have done. Martha guided the horse onto the dusty road leading out of town. He's thrown himself into his work and his children since then, barely taking time to eat or sleep properly. Emma watched the landscape change as they traveled. The harsh, dry terrain near the town gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and wildflowers. It was beautiful in its own stark way, so different from the green valleys of her childhood in Pennsylvania. The children have been struggling without a mother's touch, Martha continued. Lucy tries her best to help, but she's just a little girl herself. Samuel has become withdrawn and prone to tantrums. And poor little Mary cries for her mama, though she's too young to really understand what happened. Emma's heart ached for these motherless children. Despite her own pain, she found herself eager to meet them, to see if she could provide some comfort to their troubled young lives. The Sullivan farm appeared in the distance as they crested a hill. It was modest but well-kept, with a sturdy wooden house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Fields of corn and wheat stretched beyond the main buildings, and Emma could see cattle grazing in the distance. It spoke of hard work and perseverance, of someone who took pride in what he had built. As they approached the house, Emma noticed a small figure sitting on the front porch steps. It was a dark-haired girl who could only be Lucy, the 6-year-old Martha had described. She looked up as the wagon approached, and Emma was struck by how serious and sad her young face appeared. That's Lucy, Martha said softly. See how she watches over everything? That child has taken on far too much responsibility for someone her age. Emma studied the little girl as they drew closer. Lucy wore a faded blue dress that was clean but patched in several places. Her dark hair was neatly braided, though several strands had escaped to frame her solemn face. When their eyes met, Emma saw intelligence there, and wariness, and a bone-deep tiredness that no child should carry. Martha brought the wagon to a stop near the house, and Lucy stood slowly, smoothing her skirts with unconscious dignity. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins," she said in a voice that seemed too mature for her years. "Hello, dear. Is your father around? I've brought someone I'd like him to meet." Before Lucy could answer, a crash and a child's wail came from inside the house. Lucy's face creased with worry, and she hurried toward the door. Samuel knocked over the flower again. She called over her shoulder. "Papa's in the back field with the new calf." Emma and Martha exchanged glances. Without thinking, Emma climbed down from the wagon and followed Lucy into the house. The scene that greeted her was one of domestic chaos. Flour covered the kitchen floor, and a small boy with tears streaming down his face, while an even smaller girl sat in a corner, crying in sympathy with her brother's distress. "Oh, Samuel," Lucy said with the weary patience of someone far beyond her years. "I told you not to climb on the counter." Emma knelt down beside the crying boy. "Hello there," she said gently. "I'm Emma. You must be Samuel." The little boy looked up at her with surprised blue eyes, his tears temporarily forgotten. He had his father's dark hair but lighter eyes, and his face was round with baby softness despite being 4 years old. "I was trying to reach the cookies," he whispered, as if confessing a great crime. "Well, that's a very understandable thing to want to do," Emma said seriously. "But it looks like the flower had other ideas. Should we clean this up together?" Samuel nodded eagerly, and Emma turned to include Lucy in her smile. "Would you like to help too, Lucy? And perhaps you could introduce me to your little sister?" Lucy's wariness seemed to soften slightly. "That's Mary," she said, pointing to the toddler in the corner. "She gets scared when Samuel cries." Emma approached the little girl carefully. Mary had soft brown curls and the same blue eyes as Samuel, but her face was rounder, more babyish. She looked up at Emma with curiosity mixed with caution. "Hello, Mary," Emma said softly, sitting on the floor near the child. "I'm a friend of Mrs. Jenkins. Would you like to help us clean up the kitchen?" Mary considered this solemnly, then nodded and raised her arms to be picked up. Emma felt her heart squeeze as she lifted the warm, solid weight of the toddler. It had been so long since she had held a child. Working together, they had the kitchen tidied in short order. Emma found herself naturally falling into a rhythm with the children, showing Samuel how to sweep properly, letting Mary help by picking up the largest pieces of debris, and working alongside Lucy to wipe down surfaces. "You're very good at taking care of your brothers and sister," Emma told Lucy as they finished. "But it must be tiring sometimes." Lucy's composure cracked just slightly. "Papa works so hard, and someone has to watch them. I don't mind, but sometimes I just wanna what?" Emma encouraged gently. "Wanna be little too," Lucy whispered, as if admitting a shameful secret. Emma's heart broke for this serious little girl who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "You know what? Being 6 means you should get to be little sometimes. Taking care of others is important, but so is playing and having fun." Before Lucy could respond, they heard heavy footsteps on the porch. A man's voice called out, "Lucy? I heard Mrs. Jenkins's wagon. Is everything all right?" Emma felt her stomach tighten with nervousness as the front door opened. James Sullivan stepped into his kitchen, and she was immediately struck by how different he was from Thomas Whitmore. Where Thomas had been polished and concerned with appearances, James was clearly a man who worked with his hands. His clothes were dusty from farm work, his dark hair was tousled, and his face was tanned from long hours in the sun. But it was his eyes that caught Emma's attention. They were kind, but deeply tired, the eyes of a man carrying a heavy burden. When he saw her holding Mary, his expression shifted to one of surprise, and something that might have been longing. "Papa!" Samuel ran to his father, chattering excitedly about the flower accident and how the nice lady had helped clean it up. James's eyes met Emma's over his son's head, and she saw recognition dawn in his face. Word of her situation had clearly reached him as well. She braced herself for judgment or pity, but instead saw only gentle curiosity. "Mr. Sullivan," Martha said, entering the kitchen behind him. "I'd like you to meet Emma Carson. I believe she might be the answer to the prayers you've been too proud to say out loud."